Hi there, my name is Phoebe Wagner and my pronouns are she, her. I am a PhD candidate at University of Nevada, Reno. I'm also, as an acknowledgement of land, I worked on this paper and wrote this paper on the homeland of the Susquehannock people in what is now known as so-called Williamsport, Pennsylvania. And I will be talking today about Jeff VanderMeer's work, Southern Reach Trilogy, and the title of my paper is When We Survive, Transformation in Jeff VanderMeer's The Southern Reach Trilogy. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and begin. Thank you all for listening. Jeff VanderMeer's The Southern Reach Trilogy has often been described as eco-horror, but that descriptor emerges from the reader's position that the transcorporeality of the human body is a space of horror. In this paper, I reconfigured this idea of horror by examining how VanderMeer writes of transformation from human to more than human as necessary rather than terrifying. The trilogy focuses on a place rather than a specific character, Area X, an expanding area of transformation where biological elements are nearly unrecognizable. Set on an undisclosed coastline, a government agency has been sending in teams of people to crack the mystery of Area X. Anything that enters Area X is transformed, including the human investigators. Thus, the horror is born from the fear of adaptation and transformation into the non-human rather than the fear of the place itself. By the end of the trilogy, though, Area X's expansion is unstoppable. It will continue to expand until the whole planet is transformed. Indeed, much of the scholarship on VanderMeer has centered on the horrific changes demonstrated in his fiction. The inevitability of Area X spreading parallels the current inevitability of the climate crisis spreading, which will continue to worsen until the entire living world is transformed. Through Area X, VanderMeer explores the fear of what it means for the idea of human to be breached by the unknown. In other words, the characters are presented with their transcorporeality. In Bodily Nature, Stacey Alamo writes, imagining human corporeality as transcorporeality in which the human is always intermeshed with the more than human world, underlies the extent to which the substance of the human is ultimately inseparable from the environment. The fear of the environment and the desire to separate from it is a common plot in speculative fiction, whether it's the ever-present zombies, vampires, and werewolves, or First Contact gone wrong. Indeed, much of VanderMeer's trilogy appears to follow this traditional plotline. Most of the characters do not survive Area X because they refuse to recognize their intermeshed self with the environment and adapt to Area X. A point of view character, the biologist, survives and learns to thrive due to her acceptance of, and even desire for, adaptation, thus recognizing her transcorporeality. The plot of the first novel, which is titled Annihilation, appears straightforward and revolves around figuring out the mysteries of Area X, a zone cordoned off by the US military for experimentation after the landscape experiences a transformation of unknown causes. The format is journal entries by a character simply called the biologist. The team is 4 women who have been training for months to enter Area X. All go by similar titles, such as the psychologist, who is the team leader and also hypnotizes the other members to help them deal with the strangeness of Area X, or at least so she says. As the journal progresses, the reader learns more about these more than human mysteries, largely a lighthouse and a tunnel/tower. First, there's the tower, which is actually a hole in the ground, with steps leading to different levels, and inverse of the lighthouse, which is explored in the second half of the novel. Initially, the biologist believes the tunnel tower is an inanimate object. As they proceed deeper, the expedition finds words are written on the wall in some of the sort of living lichen or fungi. While the words feel apocalyptic or even biblical, even this first reference connects the human and the environment. Quote, where lies the strangling fruit that comes from the hand of the sinner? I shall bring forth the seeds of the dead to share with the worms, end quote. In a traditional horror plot moment, the biologist feels compelled to inspect the words. Indeed, it is her job on the team, she tells herself. Any reader of horror will recognize this is a bad idea, but the biologist is fascinated. Quote, other things existed in this miniature ecosystem of fungi, half hidden by the green filaments. Most of these creatures were translucent and shaped like tiny hands embedded by the base of the palm. I leaned in closer, like a fool, like someone who had not had months of survival training or even studied biology. Triggered by a disturbance in the flow of air, a nodule in the W chose that moment to burst open, and a tiny spray of golden spores spewed out. I pulled back, but I thought I had felt something entering my nose. While this moment is a key aspect of the horror genre, it shifts Area X from an environment to be studied, puzzled over, to a living, more than human place that will impact the human actors as they will impact it. Alemo puts it this way: indeed, thinking across bodies may catalyze the recognition that the environment, which is too often imagined as inert, empty space or as a resource for human use, is in fact a world of fleshy beings with their own needs, claims, and actions. While the biologist's team might have come to Area X for such a purpose, to the biologist, the place is active, even as our idea of human is changed. VanderMeer undercuts the traditional horror of the moment of the biologist's infection through the biologist's reaction. She records, quote, "I was unlucky, or was I lucky?" She doesn't panic, she doesn't tell the rest of the team, and instead she writes, "A calm had settled over me." She adapts to this moment, knows that there wouldn't be an antidote anyway, and decides to study herself and reactions. She embraces the transcorporeality of her body. Indeed, this, quote, infection by the non-human changes her perception of Area X and what lives in that zone. The other characters are quickly dispensed with. The anthropologist is killed by whatever more than human being lives in the tower/tunnel. The psychologist disappears, and the surveyor stays at the base camp while the biologist goes to the lighthouse. Thus, much of the short novel is ruminations, flashbacks, or lone actions by the biologist rather than the human characters interacting together. The other large portion of the novel is interactions with the non-human, which are often horrific, but the horror is undercut by the biologist's reaction. For example, the biologist writes of a non-human not seen but heard nightly. Quote, "All you heard was the low moaning. The effect of this cannot be understood without being there. The beauty of it cannot be understood either. And when you see beauty in desolation, it changes something inside of you." Such an unidentified noise suggests horror, but the biologist immediately undercuts those feelings as she is not concerned and even calls it beautiful. As she is living with little protection in a transforming landscape full of environmental terrors, this reaction seems at odds with her actual situation. Similarly, the biologist describes a moment with a dolphin that evokes horror but also beauty. Quote, "I knew that the dolphins here sometimes ventured in from the sea, had adapted to the fresh water. As they slid by, the nearest one rolled slightly to the side. It stared at me with an eye that did not, in that brief flash, resemble a dolphin eye to me. It was painfully human, almost familiar. The human eye is a disturbing moment, not only for the shock of seeing something impossible, but because of its demonstration of transcorporeality, human impact on Area X at the cellular and evolutionary levels." As Lamo writes, but by underscoring that trans indicates movement across different sites, transcorporeality also opens up a mobile space that acknowledges the often unpredictable and unwanted actions of human bodies, non-human creatures, ecological systems, chemical agents, and other actors. Therefore, the horrific aspect of Area X begins to shift from the more traditional horror story, where a character must survive a terrifying environment, to a story of adaptation for both the biologist and the more than human beings that she and the other humans have impacted. By the end of Annihilation, the biologist is overcome with her, quote, infection, what she calls the, quote, brightness. The brightness impacts not only her concept of human, but her perception of Area X, and she appears to have adapted to its supposed horrors. The biologist records in her journal, quote, "The terrible thing, the thought I cannot dislodge after all I have seen, is that I can no longer say with conviction that this is a bad thing. Not when looking at the pristine nature of Area X, then the world beyond, which we have altered so much. Before she died, the psychologist said I had changed, and I think she meant I had changed sides," end quote. While an obvious reading of this line would be to suggest the biologist no longer supported the agency that had sent her to unlock Area X's mysteries, but rather had become, one of those mysteries, another reading could be to see changed and changed sides as referring to the same moment. Her shift in understanding human as singular, corporeal. The biologist embraces this shift in her thinking and physicality. Quote, the thought of continually doing harm to myself to remain human seems somehow pathetic, end quote. Here, the idea of what is horrific about Area X has shifted. The biologist has embraced the more than human and adapted to Area X, so much so that her greatest threat at the end of the novel is not the more than human, but rather the last human of her team. It is this other human who has come to see her as a non human entity changed by Area X, and thus an enemy, that nearly kills the biologist. By the end of the trilogy and the third novel, Acceptance, the biologist is more than human, but not a monster, at least in the traditional sense of the horror genre. Rather, she aligns with Anna Singh et al.'s idea of a monster. Quote, against the conceit of the individual, monsters highlight symbiosis, the enfolding of bodies within bodies, in evolution and in every ecological niche, end quote. Indeed, the biologist is no longer individual but multiple, as the more than human biologist meets another version of herself in Ghostbird, who has come with a final team to Area X. Even though the more than human version of the biologist appears monstrous, Ghostbird does not fear her, once again undercutting and repositioning what it actually means to be horrific. Rather, Ghostbird recognizes, quote, a questing, a communication or communion from the more than human biologist. While the other members of the team fear the biologist, Ghostbird recognizes and explores her. Quote, Ghostbird leaned out the window, reached out and pushed through the shimmering layer, so like breaking the surface of a tidal pool to touch what lay within. And her hands found purchase on that slick, thick skin among all those eyes, her eyes staring up at her. End quote. Ghostbird's continued description connects the biologist to the ocean, particularly tide pools, which is one of the biologist's cherished memories, researching in such tidal pools in the northern tip of Washington state. That biome, too, then, had become part of her transcorporeality as she adapted to Area X and became more than human, though, importantly, not something to be feared. Not a monster, but more. As Ghostbird describes the biologist, quote, nothing monstrous existed here, only beauty, only the glory of good design, of intricate planning. From the lungs that allowed this creature to live on land or at sea to the huge gill slits hinted at along the sides, shut tightly now, but which would open to breathe deeply of seawater when the biologist once again headed for the ocean. The third novel, Acceptance, ends with Area X having expanded potentially across the entire planet. Regardless, there is no way to stop it, only adapt to it. While Area X represents this transformation at speed that will not be paralleled in the climate crisis, the novel presents a sense of finality. The only way forward is to recognize what is understood as human is permeable, transcorporeal. As Lamo describes it, emphasizing the material interconnections of human corporeality with the more than human world allows us to forge ethical and political positions that can contend with the numerous late 20th and early 21st century realities in which human and environment can by no means be considered separate. Indeed, in Ghostbird's final section, she describes walking out of what had once been the Area X border, but is now expanded. Just as Ghostbird is not what others consider human due to her connection to the biologist and her adaptation to Area X, so has the human changed. Ghostbird's companion Grace could not sense the way the building slowly took one breath and then another, the way it sighed. She could not sense the echo at the heart of the southern reach that told Ghostbird that this once human place had built its own ecology, its own biosphere. It is because Ghostbird recognizes she is not human that Ghostbird can navigate and adapt to Area X, even as it changes the rest of the world. Connected and adapted to Area X as she is, Ghostbird does not fear the expansion, but her companion still struggles to comprehend at the end of the novel. So Ghostbird helps her to think beyond the human. In the following exchange, her companion Grace says, what if there is no world out there? Not as we know it, or no way out to the world. Grace says this while existing in that moment in a world that was so rich and full. We will know soon enough, Ghostbird said, and took Grace's hand for the moment, squeezed it. End quote. Grace has yet to adapt to this climate change, has yet to see the possibility in the world around her. She is still stuck in her fear of Area X, as represented in the previous pages when she is fearful of the noise in the bush, just a marmot. For being a trilogy often labeled as eco horror, there is little to fear at the end of the book, except for the idea that Area X is expanding. Yet that is presented over and over again as not something fearful, but rather a transformation full of possibility. That the idea constructed by human characters such as Grace that the quote world is impermeable, just as the biologist in book one rejected the idea of the human body as impermeable, is false. In the final lines of the trilogy, a character writes, "The world we are a part of now is difficult to accept, unimaginably difficult. I don't know if I accept everything even now. I don't know how I can, but acceptance moves past denial, and maybe there's a different defiance in that too." End quote. Just as it is doubtful if what the reader understands as human will survive the expansion of Area X, so must humanity consider how we will adapt with the rest of the living world in order to survive the climate crisis. While topics like ecological collapse are the horrific element in many horror stories, such issues are becoming everyday life. And yes, we have every right to be angry and horrified, but speculative writers like Jeff VanderMeer can help us look beyond the fearful present moment. Rather, can we speculate what that adaptation might look like? Can we find demonstrations of transcorporeality to help switch horror to wonder? Rather than fearing climate change, framing it as something that can be stopped, a line drawn in the sand, a border to Area X. What possibilities lie in embracing this transformation as individuals and communities? And that ends my paper. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you to the chair and my other panelists for being here.